What you just witnessed isn't a roster issue or a Caitlin Clark failure, it is a fundamental crisis of philosophy, vision, and coaching. Over the next few minutes, we are tearing this down brick by brick and possession by possession until the undeniable truth is staring you right in the face. Welcome to Street Hoops, I'm your host, Dre Fiver, and we are diving straight into the most uncomfortable, overdue conversation in women's basketball. Yes, Caitlin Clark's 31-foot logo dagger rescued the Indiana Fever from a historic, humiliating collapse against the Washington Mystics, and that legendary shot deserves every bit of the hype. But Street Hoops refuses to coast on the surface. We don't celebrate a car crossing the finish line while ignoring the fact that the engine almost detonated 3 times on the track. Today, we expose exactly what that game winner is masking: a vanished 17-point lead, agonizing shot clock violations, and possession so fundamentally broken that calling it an offense is a flat-out insult. We are exposing how the most electric basketball player on the planet is being systematically neutralized under Stephanie White's rigid offensive system. By the end of this video, you will have an opinion, a real one, because this critical conversation cannot wait a single second longer, so let's get straight into it. The raw, alarming facts of this game alone expose the crisis before we even touch the strategic breakdown. The Indiana Fever built a massive 17-point lead against a struggling 4-6 Washington Mystics squad holding one of the worst defensive ratings in the league, only to violently cough almost all of it up. Washington systematically outscored the Fever in both the third and fourth quarters, leaving Indiana trailing by 1 in the final minute after their star player choked away 2 consecutive free throws. The only reason this didn't end in a humiliating, historic collapse was because Sophie Cunningham went completely rogue on an inbound play, skipping a cross-court pass to an unguarded Caitlin Clark who ruthlessly drained that 31-foot logo dagger. Now here is the brutal truth absolutely nobody else is saying out loud: that game winner was a complete accident that was never supposed to happen. The actual play Stephanie White drew up in that high-stakes timeout was explicitly designed for Kelsey Mitchell. Watch the tape and you will see Cunningham's eyes locked on Mitchell with zero initial intention of feeding Clark until a split-second read and a gambled Washington steal forced her hand. Think about how damning that is. Caitlin Clark rescued the Indiana Fever's season on a play that wasn't even drawn up for her, surviving purely on a teammate going off script and a defender guessing wrong. If you can watch the franchise cornerstone win a game by sheer coincidence and just shrug it off, then you are completely blind to how broken this system truly is. Here is the coaching truth that applies from youth leagues straight to the professionals: when you possess the best player in the building, the entire play runs through them, full stop, no exceptions, and no coaching philosophy overrides that reality. You don't bench Tom Brady in the clutch, you don't phase out Lionel Messi, and when you have a generational weapon like Caitlin Clark, the ball belongs in her hands. Yet, week after week, we are watching Stephanie White design rigid systems and stagnant rotations that treat Clark like a generic option rather than the irreplaceable, unguardable powerhouse she is. This offense has become a painful crisis of execution, perfectly illustrated by a glaring possession against the Mystics where Clark was left completely stranded with zero off-ball movement, forcing her to dump the ball off and watch the play die as the shot clock expired on a contested, desperate heave by Lexi Hull. This wasn't an isolated anomaly. It is a recurring nightmare of minimal ball movement, a complete lack of transition pace, and Clark being systematically immobilized. Walking the ball up the floor against a bottom-tier defense isn't bad luck, it is a broken system delivering predictably disastrous results. This is where the frustration boils over because we have all seen Caitlin Clark play a completely different way. We've seen a version of this franchise that operated with lethal pace, freedom, and flow. Rewind to those explosive 2024 highlights and look at how she pushed the ball in transition off defensive boards, dissecting defenses before they could even set up, throwing those telepathic, no-look dimes that made you leap off your couch. That team was an infectious, high-octane machine that forced millions of casual fans to fall in love with Wnba basketball. To be completely precise, and this isn't personal, it's a cold basketball evaluation, Stephanie White has taken a multi-million-dollar Ferrari and decided to use it for a mundane grocery run. She inherited a high-performance McLaren, arguably the most devastating offensive weapon in WNBA history, packed with unprecedented vision, lethal range, and elite court management, and stuffed that weapon into a sluggish, predictable, half-court prison. White is driving the most exhilarating sports car ever built at 45 miles per hour to the local grocery store and calling it transportation, completely neutralizing everything that makes Caitlin Clark dangerous. Let's address the foul trouble, because the national media's narrative framing this entirely as a Caitlin Clark discipline problem is deeply frustrating and fundamentally flawed. While Clark has admitted she needs better defensive positioning, the reality is that opposing offenses are ruthlessly hunting her every single night to disrupt her rhythm and neutralize her offensive impact. Every team in this league has a game plan to bait her into early whistles, resulting in marginal, incidental contact calls that would never be whistled against anyone else. In the second half of this Mystics matchup, Clark picked up a highly debatable foul, the exact type of controversial whistle where a superstar looks at the bench expecting their coach to challenge the call. Stephanie White had a challenge available and completely sat on it, only to double down at halftime by publicly labeling her team undisciplined and blaming players for putting themselves in poor defensive positions. Meanwhile, the moment Kelsey Mitchell picked up a foul earlier in that exact same game, White didn't hesitate for a second. She immediately challenged the call, went to bat for her player, and got the call successfully overturned. I'm not suggesting a conspiracy or that Stephanie White actively plots to undermine Caitlin Clark, but the visible inconsistency and double standards in her coaching decisions demand honest examination. Publicly branding the team undisciplined during a press conference while refusing to advocate for your franchise cornerstone with an available challenge tool is an indefensible leadership failure. Clark has been nothing but classy, publicly defending White and emphasizing their genuine personal bond, but personal loyalty cannot answer these glaring basketball questions. It doesn't explain a sluggish offensive philosophy, nor does it justify repetitive shot clock violations where the most lethal offensive weapon in the league is exiled to the corner to watch teammates run dead-end plays. Look, Street Hoops doesn't cater to what people want to hear. White is an organized coach who builds strong locker room chemistry and excels at dragging games into the mud for a grinding defensive dogfight, but Caitlin Clark is fundamentally not a war of attrition player. Clark is the definition of high pace, fluid creativity, and game-breaking vision, assets that are utterly neutralized when trapped in a slow, predictable, half-court prison that works against its own best interests. The classic Barcelona analogy is flawless here. During their legendary run, world-class attackers like Thierry Henry, Samuel Eto'o, and David Villa all understood that their primary job description was to pull defenders away and occupy attention to maximize Lionel Messi. That wasn't an insult to their talent, it was elite basketball intelligence, and it's the exact philosophy this coaching staff is stubbornly refusing to adopt. That is the design, yet when you look at the Indiana Fever, the stated philosophy is to run a sluggish half-court system where a generational talent like Caitlin Clark is treated as just another option, left standing in the corner while the critical game-winning play is drawn up for someone else. That is the exact opposite of the Barcelona blueprint. It is building around secondary options and praying your superstar bails you out. This directly intersects with the uncomfortable conversation surrounding Kelsey Mitchell, an elite, all-star caliber scorer whose 15 points against the Mystics were vital to Indiana's survival. The real basketball argument here isn't that either player is bad, but rather that Mitchell and Clark are fundamentally incompatible within this specific, unimaginative system that fails to generate the movement, spacing, or pace required to maximize them simultaneously. Instead of a devastating backcourt duo, the offense operates at a compromised 60% of its potential ceiling, which is a damning coaching and design failure, not a player problem. If the Indiana Fever refuse to execute a complete 180 on this offensive philosophy, leadership will inevitably face an impossible crisis. Let's be crystal clear, trading Caitlin Clark is an absolute non-starter that would cause an organizational, financial, and cultural catastrophe, meaning the only viable solution left on the table is a mandatory, aggressive overhaul of the system itself. It is a theoretical debate that only exists because changing the system to fit Clark's elite skill set is apparently too difficult for this coaching staff to implement, making it necessary to even float alternative scenarios just to highlight the severity of the crisis. The real answer is embarrassingly simple: unleash Caitlin Clark, let her dominate in transition, force the other four players to hunt for space, and run every single action through your generation-defining superstar. You do not need a decade of coaching experience to realize that you never relegate greatness to the corner to watch a broken play expire. Looking back at that game winner, despite the foul trouble, the blown 17-point lead, and the fact that the play was drawn up for someone else, Clark still ruthlessly drained a 31-foot dagger with the weight of the franchise on her shoulders. That is unteachable greatness, the extraordinary ability to rise completely above a suffocating system and deliver in the clutch. That is precisely why watching this offensive stagnation is so painful. You do not bottle up a Formula 1 car at grocery run speeds, and you do not build an offense where a transcendent weapon is treated as an afterthought. You spread the floor, ignite the motion, maximize your generational centerpiece, and get out of the way to let talent breathe, because the Indiana Fever have Caitlin Clark, and it's time they started acting like it. The Indiana Fever possess a once-in-a-generation, lifetime talent, yet they are burning her energy at a mere 60% capacity within a suffocating system, and that massive gap between her raw capability and this team's rigid infrastructure is the most frustrating story in basketball. Caitlin Clark rescued the franchise with a 31-foot dagger on a play explicitly drawn up for someone else after a collapse that never should have happened, proving she can bail out bad coaching, but hoping for a miracle cannot be the standard. We need a system worthy of her greatness, one that grants the space, freedom, and high-octane tempo to unlock her full potential, because while a compromised Clark is extraordinary, a fully unleashed Clark wins championships and makes history. The ball is squarely in Stephanie White's court to aggressively overhaul this sluggish philosophy, match the system to the superstar, and let this team breathe. That is a wrap on today's episode of Street Hoops. I am Wnba, and if you respect this unfiltered analysis, smash that like button right now to defy the algorithm. Drop your raw opinions in the comments below. Does White need to completely scrap this offense? Can Clark and Mitchell truly coexist, or has this coaching staff already hit a ceiling? Subscribe, lock in those notifications, and join the community where the real basketball conversation lives, because the system must evolve, the offense must change, and Caitlin Clark deserves a hell of a lot better than being an afterthought on her own floor. Peace.